thing we had was that Noah came out of the ark and he prayed in an altar, and he prayed, and then the earth were subdivided into 3 types of nations, Sam, Ham, and Japheth. And then they used to speak the same language, all of them. The whole earth used to speak the same language, the same words came about as they journeyed east, that they found a plain land of Shinar and settled there. And land of Shinar is there in Iraq nowadays. And they started building like a high tower. They started building a big building, and they were able to make good bricks. So when they made good bricks, they thought, okay, we can go higher and higher and higher. And they were thinking to go up to heaven so that they can reach to God up to heaven. So the Lord said that they are one people, they shall have all the same language, and this is that they began to do. Now nothing which they propose to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down there and confuse their language so that they will not understand one another's speech. So that was at Babel, and in Arabic you say the word Babel or Balbil means different tongue, when they speak different tongues. So they started to have different languages, and as they spoke different languages, they did not understand each other. So the process of building got obstructed. They couldn't continue the building, and that project was aborted. So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of the earth, and they stopped building the city. Therefore the name was called Babel, because the Lord confused the languages of the whole earth. From there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of the whole earth. So if we look at Genesis chapter 5, we see that there is a list of 10 generations: Adam, and then Seth, Enosh, Kenan, Mahalalel, Jared, Enoch who went up to heaven, Methuselah, and then Lamech and Noah. And then from Noah there was 3 children, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And then in Genesis 11 we see the genealogy from Shem. So Shem, and then Arphaxad, Canaan, Shelah, Eber, Peleg, Reu, Sirog, Nahor, Terah, and then Abraham, Nahor, and Haran, the 3 children of Terah. So Terah is the father of Abraham. So we can see here 20 generations from Adam down to Abraham. So that's comparing Genesis 5 to 11. In the first 10 or 11 chapters of Genesis, we see the most important events, that the creation, the fall, and the flood. And all the earth was just one type. They spoke one language, and there was no differences with the languages. And this first 11 chapters covered 2,000 years. It's a long part of the Bible. And then we see in Genesis 12 to 50, that's the end of the book of Genesis, people predominantly Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. That's the persons we will cover from chapter 12 to 50. And that is the family of Abraham. So we see that the focus shifted from all the humanity now to Abraham and his children or his offsprings. And then we see also that this covers only about 250 years. So this is just a broad cover for the book of Genesis, the first 11 chapters compared to the chapters 12 to 50. We see Terah, the father, and then he has 3 children: Abraham, which became Abraham after that, or Ibrahim. And then he has another son, Nahor, and Haran. And Haran has his son, Lot. So we see later on that Abraham was moving around with his nephew being Lot. So Lot was the son of Haran, the brother of Abraham. So Haran died in the presence of his father Terah, in the land of his birth in Ur of Chaldeans. And if you remember, Ur of Chaldeans is part of Iraq. Up until today we still have Chaldeans. So where is Ur? We can see Ur in the map. If you remember this part of the world, we said in the first time that this is Mesopotamia, or the Fertile Crescent, and this area is today's Iraq. Very close to, back Baghdad and Mosul and today's cities in Iraq. So Terah took Abraham his son and Lot the son of Haran his brother, and his grandson and Sarai and his daughter-in-law and his son Abraham's wife. They went out together from Ur of Chaldeans in order to enter the land of Canaan. Canaan is today's Philistine or Israel. And they went as far as Haran and settled there. The days of Hira were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. So where is Haran in the map? So you can see that they moved up north along the rivers of Tigris or Euphrates. So these two rivers run in this area of Iraq up to the north of Syria nowadays. So go forth, God gave this to Abraham. He gave him the order to get out of where he was. So now we're starting the story of Abraham, and we see that Abraham from the beginning of the story was actually a sojourner. He traveled a lot. He traveled based on the advice of God. God will tell him, get out of here and go there, and he would do that. So what did God say to Abraham first time? He said, go forth from your country and from your relatives and from your father's house to the land which I show you, and I will make you a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, so you shall be a blessing. So we see here, we spoke about this pattern. My goodness. Technology, when it's working, it's fantastic, but when you lose it, do we have to go back again and scroll over?
Do you want to throw the laptop?
But I think laptop is a lot easier. So God said to Abraham, go out from your country and from your relatives' father's house to the land I will show you. And that's what Abraham did. And then we see here like a pattern that there's a promise given to Abraham, called to leave his family, promise of the seed, and then Abraham travels in Egypt. She is my sister, he says, and then Lot and Abraham, they do negotiations together, and then Abraham rescues Lot and people of Sodom, and then Abraham prepares a sacrifice of covenant of ceremony, and God promises descendants and the land again. God's promises keeps repeated there. Hagar and Ishmael, and then we see Abraham's covenant. And then we see a repeating, like a mirror image. So Abraham and Ishmael circumcised, and then we see Abraham prepares a meal. God's promises Sarah will give birth to Isaac, so that is mirrored in the fourth line from the top. And then we go down, God and Abraham negotiations, again that's mirrored the third one from the top. Angels rescue Lot and destroy Sodom. Then the next one, sojourn to Gerar, that is similar to sojourn to Egypt. And then the promise fulfilled, Isaac is born, Hagar and Ishmael sent out, Isaac offered on an altar, that is mirrored with the first one. So there is like a pattern, the same story repeated, and like the same steps are repeated again. So the next travel, so the first travel was from Ur to Haran, and then the second travel was from Haran down to Palestine. And we see Abraham took Sarai and his wife and Lot, his nephew, and all their possessions which they had and accumulated, and the persons which they had acquired in Haran, like all their servants and all of them, and the people following them, and they set out for the land of Canaan, and thus they came to the land of Canaan. So I want you to remember this part of the map, which is called many names. This part of the map, which is where the tip of the arrow, the red arrow there, this is Canaan, which can be called Palestine or Palestine. It can be also called Israel. Today in the map, if you look for it, it would be called Israel. When I was a little child, when we looked at maps, that part of the world was called Philistine, because it's a disputed land. It's an occupied territory. So Arabs would call it occupied territory because it's occupied by Israelis. Israelis call it the promised land, and they call it their land. And if you look at the map today, it's called Israel. So In the Bible, in the Old Testament, it was called Canaan. Alright? Before it was called Canaan, there was also many other names to it. So you will find the names of the little cities, not as a big country. So the people of Ashdod, the people of Jebusites, the people of the towns. So there wasn't like one unified country to this area. So Abraham took Sarai, and we said that part. And then, where is Shechem? Shechem is in the middle of this area of land that we talk about. Shechem and Jerusalem. So the city of Jerusalem is the most famous. So the Lord appeared to Abraham and said, to your descendants I will give this land. So that's the promise. That's why the Israelis, they call it the promised land. Alright, so they call it the promised land based on this promise. So God promised Abraham saying, I will give this land to you. So he built on an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. Okay? Abraham passed through the land. Abraham passed through the land. Which slide do you get if I get this one? So Abraham passed through the land as far as the site of Shechem to the oak of Morah, Balutat Morah in Arabic. Now the Canaanites was then in the land, and that's in the book of Genesis. Who was in the land at the time? The Canaanites. So who was original? Who was living in the land at the time? The people of the land, the Canaanites. So that's what the Philistines claim today. So this is originals. So it's a continuing conflict between these two. Alright? So the Lord appeared to Abraham and said, I will give you this land. So it's a promise from God. There he built an altar to the Lord and called upon it to the name of the Lord. Abraham journeyed more down south towards Negev. Negev is an area of desert. This area down there is an area of desert. And this is a desert. After that, more south, if you go more south, you will be in Sinai. And Sinai is in Egypt. Right? So that's why it's in direct continuity with the land of Egypt there. So there was a famine in the land. So Abraham went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was severe in the land. So from very old generations, Egypt was a rich country. They had a beautiful civilization there. They had the pharaohs. They were building cities, and they had pyramids, and they were really rich, organized country. They had chemistry, they had medicine, they knew how to keep the bodies of the dead people. So they really had good civilization, and they had a good system, so they were rich for a long time. It was probably the most important part of the world at that time. So we can see the pyramids here. Have you been to the pyramids? I should go. So Genesis 12, it says, please say that to you, Abraham said to his sister, to Sarah. Sarah was his sister, but she was also married to him. Alright? So he said to her, don't mention that you are married to me, just mention that you are my sister, because if they know that you are married to me, they will kill me to take you. She was a beautiful lady. But he didn't lie. He lied when he deleted part of the truth. She was his sister. That was not a lie, that was true. But that is not all the truth. So when you go to the court and they say to you, you have to say the truth, all the truth, nothing but the truth, that's what they mean. So you have to mention everything that is related to the subject. He didn't mention everything related to the subject, he mentioned only half of it to cover his back. But the Lord, he said to her, say that you are my sister, so that it may go well with me because of you, and that I may live on account of you. But the Lord struck Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abraham's wife. So when Pharaoh saw Sarai and asked Abraham, who is this? He said, it's my sister. So he took her, and he was going to take her as a wife. So God struck him with some plagues, and then God appeared to Pharaoh as well. And Pharaoh found out that she was also his wife. So he said to Abraham, take her and go. And he gave him all what he had given him before. So Abraham and his family in Egypt. Let's just look at these comparisons here. Abraham and his family entered Egypt because of the famine in the land, and the same thing happened that Israel, all the nation, entered Egypt because of the famine in the land. Pharaoh treated Abraham well. Pharaoh also treated Israel harshly. That's the opposite. So the Lord strikes Pharaoh and his house with great plagues, and the same thing happened again with Pharaoh at the end of the story of Moses, when he delivered all the people after the 10 plagues. So Abraham leaves Egypt with all his belongings. Also Israel leaves Egypt with all their belongings. Again, this pattern that we see, it keeps repeating itself. So this pattern happens many times. Promise given, Abraham called to leave his family and promise of the seed. Sojourn to Egypt, this is my sister, he lies about it. And then Lot and Abraham negotiations. Abraham rescues Lot and the people of Sodom. And then Abraham prepares a sacrifice for the covenant ceremony. And God promises the descendants of, and the land. And Hagar and Ishmael, what happened to her in chapter 16. And then Abraham covenant in chapter 17. And then the repeat of the pattern. Abraham and Ishmael circumcised. Abraham prepares the meal. God promises Sarah to have a son. And then God and Abraham negotiations. Angel rescues Lot and destroys Sodom. Then sojourn to Gerar. And then he repeats the same mistake again. She is my sister. Alright? And the promise is fulfilled. Isaac is born and Hagar and Ishmael are sent out. So this pattern keeps getting repeated. Abraham went up from Egypt to Negev, and we said that the Negev is a desert in this area. And he said, he and his wife and all that belonged to him, with Lot with him. And now Abraham was very rich in livestock, in silver and in gold. But this richness caused some trouble. Lot went with Abraham also, had flocks and herds and tents, and the land could not sustain them while dwelling together. They were both rich, but the shepherds of Abraham started fighting with the shepherds of Lot, and the conflict started to appear between these two groups. So, for their positions were so great that they were not able to remain together. So what happened? There was a strife between the herdsmen of Abraham's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. So the Canaanites and the Perizzites were dwelling in the land. So there's a conflict here between Abraham and Lot. So Abraham said to Lot, please let there be no strife between you and me, nor between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are brothers. Were they brothers? He was his uncle. But he humbled himself and said to him, okay, we're like brothers, so we have to part company here. Alright? So you choose. And that shows how Abraham was humble. So he could have said, I am your uncle, I get to choose first, and then you go in the other direction. But Abraham didn't say that. So he said to him, please separate from me. If to the left, then I will go to the right. So if you to the left, to the right, then I will go to the left. So choose, you choose first. So Lot lifted up his eyes and saw the valley of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere, and it was before the Lord destroyed Sodom, and Gomorrah, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as you go to Zoar. Look at the description written here. So the land was so rich, was watered, and was very fertile. So when they wanted to compare this to something really beautiful and really rich, what did they compare to? To Egypt, right? So that was like the example, the prime example of best place to be, like Victoria, the place to be. So that was the place to be at that time, right? So God was saying that this is really the most beautiful, and Abraham said to him, okay, you choose whatever you want, I will take the other option. And it came about the days of Amarphel, king of Shinar, and 5 kings. I don't want to go through difficult names, but these 5 kings agreed together, and they attacked Lot. Okay, they made war with Bera, king of Sodom, and Bersha, king of Gomorrah, and Senab, king of Admah, and Shemar, king of Zebolim, and the king of Bela. So, before we get to this point, Lot chose to live in Sodom, alright? Because it was so rich and fertile, so he thought that it would be the best place to be, so he stayed there. But unfortunately, this area was involved in a war, and Lot and his family were captured in this war. They became like captives. So in the 14th year, Shedor, Lamor, the kings of they were with him, came and defeated Rephaim in the Ashinath Kanaim and the Zozim in Ham and Emin, and so they defeated them. So the result of this war is that Lot was taken. Right? So they turned back and came to En Mishpat and conquered all the country of Amalekites and also the Amorites and lived in Hazazon Tamar. Okay? Now the valley of Siddim was full of pits, and kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, and they fled into them, but these were survived, fled to hill country, and they took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their food supply and departed, and also took Lot, Abraham's nephew, and his possessions and departed, and he was living in Sodom. Alright? So Lot was captured in this war, and Abraham heard about that his relative had been taken captive, and he let out the trained men born in his house 318 and went and in pursuit as far as Dan. He brought back all the goods and also brought back his relative Lot with his possessions and also the women and the people. Have you noticed something? How many people were there?
How many?
318. Does this number remind you of anything? Council of Nicaea, that's right. Yeah. Alright. So Abraham saved Lot, his nephew, together with all his possessions and his family and everyone. And that was really nice because he stood out for him and he helped him and got him back from captivity. So Bera, king of Sodom, and Melchizedek, king of Salim. Bera, the king of Sodom, a city on sinful pleasure. King of Salim is a city of peace. We have a comparison between these two kings. Came out to meet Abraham. Also Melchizedek came out to meet Abraham. King of Sodom offered riches to Abraham, but King Melchizedek, king of Salim, he offered a blessing to Abraham along with the bread and wine. King of Bera, Abraham refused his offer, but Abraham accepted his blessings and gifts. He actually gave him a tenth, or the tithes of his spoil of war. So that shows how Abraham knew the difference between these two kings, how he treated King of Salim in a much better way. So King of Salim, or Melchizedek, was the representative of the city of God, while Bera, king of Sodom, was the representative of the city of man, or the city of sin. Okay, Genesis 14. Melchizedek, king of Salim. Salim means salam, or peace, so he is the king of peace. He is like a symbol of our Lord Jesus Christ. Melchizedek, king of Salim, brought out bread and wine. It's amazing to see the type of sacrifice or the type of offering that was given at that time being bread and wine. It was unheard of. And it was not repeated again in the Old Testament. So if you look at the whole of Old Testament, you don't see anyone offering bread and wine except Melchizedek, king of Salim. And that's why we don't know his origin, we don't know where he's from, we don't know his genealogy, and that's why he's a symbol of the Son of God. And what did Abraham say? So he blessed him, he blessed Abraham and said, "Blessed be Abraham of God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand, and he gave him a tenth of all. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him, saying, This man is not be your heir, but one who will come forth from your body, he shall be your heir. God here is talking about the story of having a son. Abraham was very rich, as we said before, but he did not have a son. And when he looked around, he found that no one will inherit him, will inherit his possessions. So Sarai is barren. So Lot as a potential heir, Eliezer of Damascus as a potential heir, and also one from Abraham's own body will be his heir. So that wasn't clear at this point. So Abraham was waiting to God's promise. God promised Abraham so many times that his offsprings would be like the sand on the seashore, or like the stars of heaven. And then Abraham is getting older and older, but there's no son. So we have a problem here. How are we going to solve this problem? Let's see what happened. God gives the promise again. God took Abraham outside and said, Now look towards the heaven and count the stars, if you are able to count them. And he said to him, So shall your descendants be. So the promise is here, but we haven't seen any action yet. That is really difficult. Okay? So he believed in the Lord, and he reckoned to himself as righteousness. To him as righteousness. So he said, Take now your son, your only son. That's much later on. Before we get to that, you know what happened? That Abraham was worried about the whole story, and Sarah said to him, I haven't got any children, so maybe take my servant. And she gave him Hagar, her maidservant, and she said to Abraham, you can take her as a wife. And that's what happened. So they got a son, and they called him Ishmael. And then God comes later on and says to Abraham, no, I told you that it will be a son of you. And then Sarah laughs at this promise, and God hears her laughing. And when he hears her laughing, he tells her, you laughed. And she said, no. And he said, yes, you did. And then, and that's why they called him Isaac. Isaac means laugh, right? Okay, so that is the story of the birth of Isaac. Then Sarah, or Sarai, becomes pregnant, and she had the baby Isaac. And then as Isaac grew, he became like, he was much younger than Ishmael. He was like 14 years younger. So Ishmael was very strong, and he was like aggressive person. He was attacking people all the time. So Sarai was upset. She said that he's attacking my son, and asked Abraham. So Abraham said to her, look, you do what you want. So what she wanted, she kicked Hagar and her son Ishmael out. And later on, God said to Abraham, take your son. We'll come to this verse. Then he believed in the Lord, and he reckoned in him as righteousness. So he said, take now your son, which is Isaac, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I will tell you. So it's really a difficult ask when God asks Abraham to offer his son, his beloved son, but Abraham didn't think twice about it, so he did that. I think we're having, that is Abraham's covenant, God's covenant to Abraham. I'll pass this one now because it's out of the story that we're telling. Yeah, that's the story of the covenant of God to Abraham. God said to Abraham, bring these 3 animals. So I'll show you again. Bring to me 3 old 3-year-old heifer. Heifer is like a Red Bull. And then 3-year-old female goat, and a 3-year-old ram, and a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. Then brought all these to him out, cut them in two, and laid each half opposite the other. But he did not cut the birds. The birds' prey came down upon the carcasses, and Abraham drove them away. So it's really a difficult scenario when God said to Abraham, bring all these animals and cut the big ones into 2 pieces, and then the birds, keep them as one piece. And then Abraham stayed all day waiting and waiting and waiting until it became dark. As you know, if you leave carcasses on the ground, vultures would come and attack them, so Abraham was driving them away. And then towards the night, something happened. On that day the Lord made a covenant, so there was like a sudden darkness that came, and Abraham was asleep, and then the Lord appeared to Abraham, and he passed through this between the cut animals, and made a covenant with Abraham, saying, to your descendants I have given this land, from the river of Egypt, which is the Nile, as far as the great river, the river Euphrates, the Canaanites, the Kenizzites, and the Kedomanite, and the Hittite, and the Perizzite, and the Raphim, and the Amorites, and the Canaanites, and the Girgashites, and the Jebusites. As I said to you, that's names of little towns, but the people living there, they have their nationality of this place. So all of this land, between the river of Egypt, Nile, to the river of Iraq, Euphrates, all of this was like a promised land to the sons of Abraham. Alright, from the river, can you see on the map how big is this area? So from the word Egypt, the river of Egypt, Nile, to the Assyria, the river Euphrates is one of these 2 rivers there, as far as the great river, the river Euphrates. All of this land is promised. Sarai, Abraham's wife, had borne him no children. She had an Egyptian maid whose name was Hagar, and said to Abraham, behold, the Lord has prevented me from bearing children, so go to my maiden. I think we finished this part already. May your wrong done upon me, I gave my maid into your arms, but when she saw that she had conceived, I was despised in her sight. May the Lord judge between you and me. But Abraham said to Sarai, behold, your maid is in your power. Do to her what is good in your sight. So Sarai treated her harshly, and she fled from her presence. So what's happened after that? Hagar's son is Ishmael. His descendants would be innumerable, big number. Abraham's heir, his descendants will be also innumerable. Now, he will be at enmity with the world, that's Hagar's son, but Abraham's heir should be a blessing to the world. Hagar's son, which is Ishmael, every man's hand will be against him. But Abraham's heir, whoever blesses him will be blessed, and whoever curses him will be cursed. So we see here that Hagar's son, yes, he was the son of Abraham, but he had this harsh character. He had the different character, that he is aggressive and he is attacking everyone. And from this came all the Muslims and the Arabs of the world. But from Isaac's son came the children of the Jews and all the Christians as well. So it's really a big point of comparison here. But we see also many steps coming. Again, this pattern is repeated. Abraham is 99-year-old. The Lord appeared to him. God will make a covenant with Abraham to multiply. Abraham fell on his face. Abraham's name changed to Abraham. I will make you nations of you, and kings shall come forth from you. The middle one is circumcision, is commanded. And circumcision is a sign of this covenant. So we see here that Sarai, now the pattern is reversed to the other side of this slide. We see Sarai's name changed to Sarah, and she shall be a mother of the nations. Abraham became the father of the nations. Kings of people shall come to her. Abraham fell on his face and laughed, and God promises the multiplication through Isaac and Ishmael. So God went up from Abraham. So this pattern keeps coming and happening many times. Abraham is 99, Ishmael is 13 years old or 14 years old. So Abraham, father of high places, but Abraham rhymes with the father of multitudes. So that's the name changed. For I will make you the father of a multitude of nations. We have two covenants so far, the covenant with Noah and the covenant with Abraham. Remember the covenant with Noah that happened after the flood, and the sign was the rainbow. Now the covenant with Abraham involves Abraham and his descendants, and the sign was the circumcision. So we have two covenants so far. The first one is Noah, and the sign is the rainbow. The second covenant is with Abraham, and the sign is circumcision. So what is circumcision? Involved a surgical cutting, represented a spiritual reality. Circumcise then your hearts and stiffen your necks no more. That's in Deuteronomy chapter 10 verse 16. It's a sign of faith, a seal of the righteousness of the faith, which he had while uncircumcised. So we see that the circumcision to the Jews is actually like the sign of confirmation. So a baby is born, and on the 8th day this baby becomes circumcised, and as the baby becomes circumcised, it's only males by the way, this baby that gets circumcised, he gets the name to become a member of the people of God. So before the act of circumcision, he's not a member yet. He doesn't have a name, he doesn't have an identity. So the 8th day to the Jewish boy is the sign of fulfilling the promise, the sign of becoming a member of the congregation of God. So that's a very important thing for the Jews. So circumcision was the Abrahamic covenant, that baptism is in the new covenant. So we have to understand that circumcision of the Old Testament has been replaced by the baptism in the new covenant. So let's compare that. The Abrahamic covenant, the sign of the covenant is circumcision. The new covenant, the sign of the covenant is baptism. Circumcision was a sign of faith. Baptism is a sign of faith. Physical circumcision represented the spiritual process of cutting away sin, but in the new covenant, water baptism represents the identification with Christ and the spiritual cleansing that comes through the new birth. Circumcision was limited to males, but we have no distinction in baptism between male and female. So the promise was to God's people and their children, as in Deuteronomy, and also as in the book of Acts that was quoted by St. Peter in his sermon on the day of Pentecost. So the promise is to the children of God. So Abraham's three visitors. Abraham one day had three visitors. He was hospitable to them, and God gave him a prophecy on that day. So there was a blessing, we mentioned that, to Sarah, to Abraham and Sarah, and seed to come through a miracle. Because Sarah was very old at that time, was like more than 90 years of age, and it was really unexpected that she could bear a son anymore. Abraham also interceded before the Lord about Sodom and Gomorrah. So there was God's prophecy and Abraham's prayer for Lot. So Abraham was like negotiating with God. He said to him, would you destroy the city even if they have 50 people, 50 righteous people? And then God said, no, I will not destroy it if there is 50 righteous people, because there is no 50 righteous people there. So Abraham said, can I just say one more thing? If they're 40, no, there was no 40. If there's 30, if there's 20, And he kept coming down with the numbers, trying to strike a deal with God, playing on the point of mercy, God's mercy. But there was no 10 people there. There was no 10 righteous people there because it was only Lot, his wife, and 2 daughters. So he couldn't win, and the order came from heaven that this city has to be burned out as their sin was so magnified before the eyes of the Lord. So Genesis 18 and 19. 2 angels and the Lord meet Abraham as he sits at the door of his tent, and the 2 angels also met Lot as he sits at the gate of the city of Sodom. The narrative begins in the heat of the afternoon. The narrative takes up in the events in the same evening. Abraham ran to meet them and bowed down before them. Lot races to meet them and then bows down before them. A comparison between Genesis 18 and 19 we're still working on. Abraham invites these 2 people or 3 people to eat and rest from their travel. Lot does the same. He invites them and stay the night over. They immediately accepted Abraham's invitation. They initially refused Lot's invitation, but as he insists, they reluctantly accept. Abraham intercedes for Lot. Lot intercedes on behalf of the angels. Abraham is told of the impending judgment on Sodom and Gomorrah, and Lot is told of the impending destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. So Abraham's wife expresses disbelief at the promise of God concerning the birth of a son. Lot's wife expresses disbelief at God's warning not to look back at the doomed city of Sodom. I don't know what's wrong with these wives. Why they don't believe me? But well, this is just human. Humans sometimes take different opinions. If someone is taking the right side, the other one tends to take the left just to oppose and see what happens. So I don't know what was behind all this opposition from these wives, but let's just live with that. It culminates in the birth of a son for Abraham, and it culminates in the death of a city, or 2 cities, Sodom and Gomorrah. So Abraham believed the promise of God. Lot became fearful due to his unbelief. God gave Abraham a son through his wife Sarah. Lot had 2 sons born through incest, with his own daughters, which is really a strange thing. If you read it in Genesis chapter 19, as you know the story, as the angels pushed them to get out of the city of Sodom and Gomorrah, they walked and they ran out quickly, but the wife of Lot was actually like missing the city, so she kept looking back, and as she was looking back, she turned to become a pillar of salt. So after that day passed and they saw the smoke of Sodom and Gomorrah going up to heaven, the 2 daughters of Lot thought that this meant that all humanity is destroyed. There is no more males left. The only male left is their father. So they felt that the only way that humanity will continue is through having a child from their father. So they got him drunk, and then one after the other they slept with him, which is really something strange that happened at that time. Lot's offspring were cursed. Pictures one in a covenant relationship with God. Pictures one approaching life independently of God. So the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven, and he overthrew these cities and all the valley and all the inhabitants of the cities and what that grow on the ground. So all of these 2 cities got destroyed. So we have Abimelech, Sarah, and Abraham. Again, Abraham and Sarah, they go to Abimelech. He was the king of Gerar. He repeated the same mistake. Abraham said, Sarah is my sister. And then Abimelech, who is someone who doesn't know God, took Sarah, and he was getting ready to make her like a wife. But God didn't like that, so God appeared to Abimelech. This story is really amazing, to see God appearing to someone who doesn't believe in God and tell him, hey, what are you doing? You're doing something really bad. Stop that and return this woman to her husband. Alright? And then we see Abimelech, the man who doesn't believe in God, talking to Abraham and telling him off. Right? Why have you done that? This was completely wrong to do that. And he returns his wife Sarah back to him. Alright? So it came about after these things that God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, and said there, here I am. He said, take now your son and your only son. So I think we went through this story. And offer him the land of Moriah, offer him as a burnt offering on one of the mountains which I will tell you. And then, do you know what is this? The Dome of the Rock. That's a mosque in Jerusalem. And this mosque in Jerusalem, they proclaim that underneath is the Temple of Solomon. And they also proclaim that this is on the mountain where Abraham offered his son Isaac. Most holy place in the land, in the Holy Land. And this is the site of conflict between the Jews and the Muslims in Jerusalem nowadays. If you go to Jerusalem, you see this. It's called the Dome of the Rock, Qubbat al-Sakhra. Genesis 22, Abraham rose early in the morning and saddled his donkey and took 2 of his young men with him and Isaac his son, and he split wood for the burnt offering, and arose and went to the place of which the Lord had told him. He didn't tell Sarah his wife, because if he told her, she would have stopped him and she would have said to him, what are you talking about? How could God give us a son after a promise, after a long time of being barren, and then now you're telling me that you're going to take him and offer him a sacrifice? She could have stopped him 100%. So Abraham did not give her a chance. On the third day, Abraham raised his eyes and saw the place from a distance. Abraham said to his young men, stay here with the donkey, and I and the lad, which is Isaac, will go over there, and we will worship and return to you. Look at the faith he had. We will worship and return back to you. We will worship and we will return back to you. So he had all the faith that they will return together. Alright? But let's see what happened. Isaac spoke to Abraham his father and said, my father. And he said, here I am, my son. And he said, behold, the fire and the wood, but there is the lamb. But where is the lamb for the burnt offering? Abraham said, God will provide for himself the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. So the 2 of them walked on together. So we see a comparison here that Isaac was carrying the wood for the fire that he would be offered as a sacrifice, and Jesus also was carrying the cross, the wood of the cross where he would be crucified on. So we see a beautiful comparison between Isaac, the son of Abraham, and our Lord Jesus Christ, the Son of God. We see this comparison working really well. We see here, Isaac is to be offered as a sacrifice to God. Jesus is offered as a sacrifice for the sins of the whole world. Isaac taken to Mount Moriah, outside the ancient city of Jerusalem. Our Lord Jesus also was taken to Golgotha, outside the city of Jerusalem. Isaac carried the wood of the sacrifice up to the mountain. Our Lord Jesus carried his own cross for the crucifixion upon the mountain. Isaac bound and laid on the altar. Our Lord Jesus was nailed to the cross as well. Isaac, 3 days for Abraham and Isaac to travel to Moriah and the place of death. 3 days our Lord Jesus after his crucifixion, he rises from the dead. So they came to the place of God has told him, and Abraham built an altar where he arranged the wood and bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Abraham stretched out his hand and took the knife to slay his son, but the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham, and he said, here I am, and said, do not stretch out your hand against your lad, do nothing to him, For now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. So Abraham raised his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him a ram caught in the thickest by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered him up for a burnt offering in the place of his son. Abraham called the name of that place, "The Lord will provide," as it is said to this day, "In the mount of the Lord it will be provided." So Sarah died after that in chapter 23 in Kiryat Arba, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. And Abraham went to mourn for Sarah and weep for her. Then Abraham rose from before his dead and spoke to the sons of Heth, saying, "I am a stranger." This is a statement. Abraham has always been a stranger. Abraham has always been traveling. He didn't stay in a place for a long time. "I am a stranger and sojourner among you. Give me a burial site among you, that I may bury my dead out of my sight." Abraham said to his servants, oldest of his household. So Abraham bought a piece of land, and he made a place where he buried Sarah, his wife. It's called the Machpelah cave, and this cave, later on in the book of Genesis, we'll see that it became also the place where Abraham was buried, was his son buried, Isaac as well, and Joseph later on. So this place is the cave of Machpelah, where all these important figures in the Bible are buried. Abraham said to his servants, the oldest of his household, who had charge of all that he owned, "Please place your hand under my thigh, and I will make you swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and God of earth, that you shall not take a wife for my son from the daughters of Canaanites, among them whom I live, but you will go to my country and my relatives and take a wife for my son Isaac." Okay? So they were, at that time, they were living on the map in the land of Palestine. Okay? And then he asked his servant to go to Haran, up north, so that he can find a wife to his son Isaac. Let's see what happened. We're coming to a piece of romance now. So we see Rebecca. Here's of the one who shall be her husband. Jacob meets Rachel, Moses meets Zipporah, Ruth meets Boaz. Many places where there is next to the water. Right? So try to remember these situations, and you'll find each of them was actually a place next to the water. Then we see our Lord Jesus also meeting with the Samaritan woman next to the well. So remember the genealogy map that we had. So Terah is the great-grandfather. He has three sons, Abraham, Nahor, and Haran. Haran's son is Lot. Lot has been traveling with Abraham, so his nephew. But Nahor, the other uncle, the brother of Abraham, had two children, Laban and Rebekah. Abraham's son is Isaac. Remember this map because, can you see it? Yeah. So remember this map is really important because it explains a lot of things. Because later on we see Isaac will go and get married to Rebekah. Okay? Rebekah is his cousin. Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was barren, and the Lord answered him, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. Have you heard the story of how Isaac got married to Rebekah? So as we hear, Abraham sent his servant, and he said to him, "Find a wife to my son." So this servant went and he was praying. He said to God, "God, give me a sign. How can I find a wife to my master's son?" So the sign would be that when I arrive to the well, where girls come out to fill their pots of water, I will ask a girl, "Can you give me a drink?" And then if the girl answers and say, "I will give you drink, you and your cattle," that would be the sign. So that was the agreement with God. He prayed, and then when he went, he met Rebecca there, and he asked her the question, and she gave the right answer. So he said to her, "Who are you?" And she said, "I am Rebecca, daughter of whom?" So she said, "I'm the daughter of," can you remember her father's name? Nahor, alright? So he said, "Wow, this is the brother of Abraham, so we are relatives." So she invited him to the house, she took him to the house of her father, and then her father offered the man some food, and he said, "No, I'm not eating or drinking until the mission I came for is fulfilled." So the father Nahor asked, "What is your mission?" So he said to him, "I'm here looking for a wife to my master's son, to Isaac." So Nahor could not say no, and he said, "Ask the girl." So they asked the girl, and the girl said, "Yes, I'm happy, I can go." So we can imagine here what was the method of dating at that time. There was no meeting outside, there was no talking, there was not even seeing. They didn't see each other, all right? So there was no communication before they see each other. There was no Facebook, there was nothing, all right? No Messenger, no Snapchat, nothing. So that's how the agreement happened. So Rebecca came out and came with the servant, and they met. She met Isaac, and as she met Isaac, Isaac was very happy to see her, and he married her, and he took her to the tent of his mother. That's his mother's tent, and she was a beautiful replacement that made him really consoled. It made him very rested, and he felt that he is all right and can continue his journey. So Isaac prayed to the Lord. So he married Rebecca, and he was 40 years of age when he married Rebecca, but she could not give him a son. And they stayed like that for 20 years, from 40 to 60. Alright? Isaac's age at the birth of Jacob and Esau was 60. So 20 years of being married, but barren as well. And after all this long time, Isaac prayed for his wife, Rebecca, and she could bear. So she conceived. At the time of birth, there was a fight who comes first, and then the children struggled together with her, and she said, "If it is so, then am I this way?" So she went to inquire of the Lord. The Lord said to her, "Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples will be separated from your body, and one people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger." Okay? So we have Jacob and Esau coming now. The first came forth red and all over like a hairy garment, and they named him Esau because that means red. Afterward, his brother came forth with him with his hand holding on to Esau's heel. So his name was called Jacob, and Isaac was 60 years old when she gave birth to them. You don't see this meaning of the word in English, but in Arabic, Jacob means Yaqub, and Yaqub means Yaqub, means to follow. Someone followed someone. Yaqub, someone, yani to follow someone. Alright? So the meaning of the name in Arabic or in Hebrew was giving the description of what happened, that he came holding the heel of his brother, of his twin brother. Okay, when the boy grew up, Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the field, but Jacob was a peaceful man living in a tent. Now Isaac loved Esau because he had a taste for game, and Rebekah loved Jacob. We are starting now a family conflict, alright? Mom loves Jacob, dad loves Esau. That is not right, okay? We're not saying that because it is the right thing to do, but we're describing history here. We're describing what happened. And as time unfolds, we will see how problems unfold with this type of wrong family relationships. Alright? So, when Jacob had cooked stew is like, he had like, they say lentils. Esau came in from the field, and he was hungry. And Esau said to Jacob, please let me have a swallow of that red stuff there, and I am famished. And therefore his name was called Edom. But Jacob said, first sell me your birthright. They were twins, but Esau was born a few minutes before Jacob. So because he was the firstborn, he had the birthright. The birthright was really an important thing in the Old Testament. The birthright means he is the first one after his father, and he is the one to get the blessing, and from him will come Jesus. So that's why it was really an important thing. And Esau had the birthright, but he really didn't know how important that was. And that's why when he was hungry, coming back from the field, tired and hungry, he sacrificed the birthright. See, okay, what was this one? So he gave him the food, and Jacob carried this in his mind all the time, that he had bought the birthright from his brother. Later on we see in chapter 26 there was a famine in the land beside the previous famine had occurred in the days of Abraham. So Isaac went to Gerar, to Abimelech, king of the Philistines. And you can see in this map that Philistine was only this area of Gaza nowadays, not the whole land of Philistine. You see where Philistine at that time? This is the area of the territory of Gaza nowadays. Is it time for Ashir?
It's time for the youth meeting.
Okay, so can I have 5 minutes a moment? Thank you. So Isaac told to stay in Canaan in chapter 26. Isaac lies about Rebekah, she's my sister. Does this remind you of anything? Yeah? Like his father. His father did that twice. So he said also Rebekah is my sister, but this time Rebekah is not his sister. Right? Rebekah is his cousin. Isaac is continually displaced from and forced to dig new wells. Abimelech makes covenant with Isaac. God gives a promise. God blesses Isaac and with abundance, and God gives the promises, gives Beersheba as well. So we'll see here the same pattern that we spoke about. I'm going to go through that. We'll make it. Came about when Isaac was old, and his eyes were too dim to see, that he called his older son Esau and said to him, my son, and he said to him, here I am. And then Rebekah was listening while Isaac spoke to his son Esau. So when Esau went to the field to hunt for the game to bring home, Jacob answered his mother Rebekah, behold, Esau my brother is a hairy man, and I am a smooth man. Perhaps my father will feel me, and I will be a deceiver in his sight, and I will bring upon myself a curse and not a blessing. But the mother said to him, your curse will be on me, my son. Only obey my voice and go and get them for me. So here Rebekah said to Jacob, you bring a meal and give it to your father, and then I will make you look like Jacob. I will make Jacob look like Esau, so that your father will not see the difference or feel the difference. So Jacob was frightened, and then he didn't want to deceive his father. But the mother here said, look, don't worry, I will help you, and if a curse comes on you, it will be on me. So obviously she's giving too much promises here, and she's pushing him to do something that is deception. So Rebekah took the best garment of Esau, her older son, which were with her in the house, and put them on Jacob, her younger son, and she put the skins of the young goats on his hands, the smooth part of his neck, and also gave him a savory food and bread, and she had made to her son Jacob. So here we see that the deception is really perfected in the sense that the mother made everything ready for Jacob. So his father Isaac said to him, please come close and kiss me, my son. So he came close, that is Jacob, pretending to be Esau. And he kissed him, and when he smelled the smell of his garments, he blessed him and said, "See, the smell of my son is like the smell of the field which the Lord has blessed. Now, may God give you of the dew of the heaven and of the fatness of the earth and abundance of grains and new wine. Now may God give you the dew of heaven and of the fatness of the earth and on the abundance of the grain and the new wine." So he started blessing him already. And he said, "It's not rightly named Jacob, for he has supplanted me these 2 times and took away my birthright. And behold, now he taken away my blessing. Now he said, have you not reserved a blessing for me?" So after Jacob deceived his father, and he took the blessing from his father, he walked away. Esau came from the field, he had the coat, and he cooked something for his father. He came to his father and said, "Look, now I have the food for you ready." So the father said, "But you already got it for me." So he said, "No, when?" And then it was really a big scream of Esau that he missed out on the blessing. And then he kept begging his father, "Is there any more blessing for me? Can you give me any more blessing?" But he said to him, "I'll give the blessing to your father, to your brother, and you will be his servant," and so on. So Esau walked out very angry, and he wanted to really do something to his brother. So the mother Rebecca told his son, Jacob, "Go and disappear, hide at your uncle's house, Laban." So he went away and stayed with Laban, and with Laban there will be a big part of the story that will be continued next time. So it's a beautiful story, and it's full of a lot of details. It's really hard to miss any of these details. That's why we keep going longer with time. So it's so beautiful. If you have time, please read the book of Genesis at home before you come next time. We're up to chapter 27. Hopefully we can finish next time. Every time I promise I can't deliver, I'm sorry about that. But it's so beautiful. We'll see you next time. God bless you. Thank you.